Philosophers talk to our times, we citizens of dystopia. One of the things that stands like a shadow over all our politics is, of course, COVID. I think it's worth spending a little bit of time thinking about how it helped pattern the current rather difficult dystopia we live in. In this piece, I am absolutely not, I am avoiding that entire issue of where it came from, because I actually think it's a red herring. Because come what may, it got out of hand. And I suppose you might go, oh, what happened was the plan all along. And maybe, but I doubt it. And why I doubt it will become very clear early on. However, what is true was that it opened up opportunities for governments and for political alliances, opportunities for some, and utter demolition for others, in ways that we're still working out what it means. Let me do the one that I find very, very easiest, because I'm part of it. The protest movement, the environmental protest movement of 2019-2020 was unthinkable after COVID. And that wasn't just because it gave the right time to regroup. The other, of course, big issue was vaccination. Because the group that would self-identify as the left, so they would emote upon the left, has right at its heart a division about two concepts of science and modernity. On the one side, there is that group, of which I would include myself, that understands science first and foremost. And yes, I would say that big chemical companies absolutely manipulate humanity, create false foods and then give you the cures to false foods. Dorothy Sayers says it brilliantly in Murder Must Advertise, when advertisers advertise food that will give you dyspepsia, and then they advertise the cure for dyspepsia. And that is capitalism. And certainly I think the same could absolutely be said about chemical companies. So people who make vaccines are never sound. But that doesn't mean vaccines don't work, for me. Now, I don't want to get sidetracked into this issue, otherwise I will lose most of you very quickly. Because there is the other half of the left who absolutely don't really believe in vaccine and get no further than the fact that capitalism is corrupt, and therefore they assume that science has been corrupted. And on big issues like Palestine, this division doesn't matter. I think that's why the left has come together, not just because of the genocide, but it's also that it's something that everybody can agree on after the agony of COVID. Because what COVID did was and that issue of vaccine, it pulled apart a division that was implicit within XR from day one, which was a division between those people who rejected things like 5G masks, and so that was the real issue. And those who thought, no, it's really about global warming. It's not about specific acts of cultural vandalism. I've put it very carefully there, because that's where I talked about 5G before. Anyway. But what the vaccine did was it made the protest then impossible, because it became the case. I remember the protest movement in 2020, it was the vaccinated only, actually, because the unvaccinated, it was felt was going to be too dangerous for them. And that totally split XR. It split the very possibility of the left revolting, because it split them. At that point they split. And there was a point that the left, that group that will self-identify the left, that will go on environmental protests and call for the end of capitalism, split totally on the issue of science, right down the middle, in a way that is unreconcilable, so that they will infight till the cows come home. So one of the fascinating effects of the entire COVID incident was that it destroyed the possibility of environmental action. For 5 years, I guess just about now we could do it again. We're just entering in that zone where everybody's a bit calmed down, a bit forgotten, we haven't all died, and we've all moved on. On the right, it's very interesting. On those groups that would be I'm never sure whether the right self-identify. I think that the right don't self-identify. I just think that they think of themselves as the people. On the side of that group that will think of themselves as a people, by which they mean a nation and country and a supposed version of history. I'm going to talk about that again tomorrow because it's a vital part of dystopia. The problem was rather more simple. On the one hand, you get things like Farage and Trump, who will certainly be vaccinated. Absolutely no doubt about it. But they have no problem with hypocrisy. They have no need to be intellectually coherent, and therefore they can advocate, or at least allow people to advocate around them, attacks on the very notion of vaccination if it gives them political gold. And it does. So they do. And so the right has gone increasingly anti-vaccine. There was always a very sinister, a few pages of the Daily Mail and the Daily Mail Online, which was the New Age right, which was, those of us who were worried about such things years ago, always felt that it was right out of the National Socialist playbook. It was kind of those sorts of quack cures that Hitler used to adore. And there were certain pages on the Daily Mail that always reminded me of that sort of stuff. And therefore, and there was always a point in the New Age movement where actually it could be very right-wing. And of course, what has therefore happened was an entire set of movements could be made here that were, I remember back in, 2019, some hippies at the end of Glastonbury came and shouted at me about global warming being a scam because it was all science. And they would now all be somewhere on the nationalist spectrum. It allowed the fact that the right could easily condemn vaccines without having to think about it because they don't need to think, allowed them to take away rather a large chunk of that part of those who would have self-identified as left-wing could just join the people who are anti-vax. So it was a wonderful, wonderful move. It gets called now a crunchy pipeline, but really it was it was kind of a flanking move on the part of the left-wing alliance, because it made that alliance impossible for a bit. And governments, what do we say of governments? Well, governments obviously rethought their power in terms of COVID, because it opened up possibilities that had never really been thought. But I think possibilities of surveillance, possibilities of monitoring a population that had not ever been dreamed of. And I think it probably helped make governments go mad, because it created an environment where this was the condition where you did want to know what all your people were doing, and offered a chance that you could know what they were doing. It offered this image of maximum control that was very problematic. I remember Johnson lamenting he couldn't reopen the country. It had been easy to close, but now nobody trusted him enough to reopen it, which was true. But also it opened up possibilities for what governments could do about monitoring populations that are instinctively deep down in why they go on for the full Palantir set. Because if you can go to the full Palantir set, you can have all the information you needed for COVID, but all the information that you want. And it turned government into something quite sinister. And with that bit, you see, one of the problems of the anti-COVID conspiracy is, although I actually believe in COVID, I believe in a lot of the conspiracy as well. Because what is true is that government did use it as a power grab. And what is also true, and I know this from teaching, is that it destroyed the confidence of a generation. And that is certainly true. That generation that get calls Generation X have in their young lives a big memory of COVID that infuses how they understand the adult world, how they understand the internet, how they understand what it means to relate to people. That is a smear that doesn't ever go, doesn't ever change. And so it is different. So their policy, and where they were, how old they were when COVID happened, affects their politics about whether they're right-wing or they're left-wing, because it affects their exposure to all sorts of conspiracy theories. and it affects the deep understanding of what the world is. And the real problem with it is the way the rest of people my age have coped with it, because it is politically so, well, on the left, spiky. It is much easier to forget it than to remember it. Because if I forget it, I can join the kind of alliances that I could join effortlessly in the pre-COVID days. But that's not good enough. It's not good enough because you've got a generation who will never forget it, who it's part of their young lives. And until that has been really properly thought, gone through, worked out what that means, we're a bit stuck. And we're stuck then with a government that doesn't really want to work it out because it can still use some of the levers that were developed during COVID for a power grab. A left that doesn't want to remember it because it splits if it does. A right that doesn't care because it will just sit and fish. And by the right, I mean those people who call themselves the people and get whipped up by nationalist politicians. And so this bit of Generation X gets this problem that lies right at the heart of it, that they're very aware of, gets unthought through, left, malignant, problematic. And so we end up with a society that is necessarily caught in its own dystopias, each moving in their own little differential trackways, making the world different one from the other in ways that are very hard, and increasingly hard, I actually think, to reconcile. It is a very poisoned legacy. Now, all the more so as COVID hid something. The reason why we had to have the lockdown, let's just go very quickly through it, because I think it probably matters in order to wrap up. The reason why we had to have the lockdown was, of course, because healthcare had been defunded. And it had been defunded to such a degree that anything other than a lockdown was impossible, because a very large number of flu cases simply overwhelms the NHS. And it absolutely does. And the real truth then of COVID was actually it was a failure of government. But that is the truth that the government will not speak. Because it thinks only of the power grab. And so what you end up with is something that nobody can actually say what it was. Evidence of mass defunding of government. And we're all caught up within a spectrum that has to deny it or fish endlessly in its murky waters, while we actually ignore the pain that it caused and carries on causing. It's the very stuff of dystopia, a truth that cannot be ever spoken, and that each is looking to gain power over, except those that have to run from it. It's a very curious situation to be in. In the end, I think we're going to have to go back to it and go through, not whether it was true or not, because that particular, or who caused it, because both of those are red herrings now. What matters is what it is still doing, and whether we are comfortable with it, or whether we could ever do anything to undo what it once was.